Jan is my co-presenter today. Jan, do you want to do a quick intro?
So my husband and I had a difficult time having children, and our second son was born 9.5 weeks prematurely in the car. In the car is important. He was sick, developmentally delayed. When he was 3.5, we found out he couldn't hear. The School for the Deaf wouldn't accept him into their program, and that was legal at the time. And so I kept looking for resources and how to deal with this child who was extremely difficult. I was recruited by the special ed teacher at the neighborhood school to serve on a school district panel. And they asked me to go to the Capitol, and that's how I got to the Capitol. I'm also an introvert, which allows me to sit in meetings and listen for a long time. Now, the coalition actually started in 1981, and it was over getting funding for early intervention. I couldn't go to the Capitol at that time because Scott was too difficult. He was a child who built fires in the house and broke windows. Now the good news. When he graduated from high school, he had academic honors, citizenship honors, and 4 scholarships, including one to the University of Utah School of Psychology. He took American Sign Language as his foreign language. And after 1 year, he served an LDS mission in the British Sign Language mission. And so he has been trilingual with English being his first language. He has a master's degree from Utah State and is a vocational rehabilitation counselor for the deaf and hard of hearing, and unfortunately lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Oh, thank you, Jan. We appreciate that introduction. I do think it's important to note that many of the systems here in Utah, the funding that has been secured, and just a lot of the policy initiatives that have occurred over the past almost 40 years now have been directly influenced by the Legislative Coalition for Persons with Disabilities. And a lot of that is due to the leadership that Jan and Chris and Joyce provided for many, many years. And so we all owe a debt of gratitude, I think, to the efforts of this remarkable team who has really helped build the social service system here in Utah. And today we will be drawing on Jan's expertise. If any of you have gone to the Capitol with Jan, you know that everybody knows Jan. And that's because Jan has developed relationships with these legislators, and it has paid off, I believe, and these legislators seeing her as an expert. And so when there's questions, when there's concerns, and when there's issues, many legislators pick up the phone and call Jan because of the efforts that she's made over the years to build relationships with them. So thank you. I'm privileged to work with Jan today on this session. So in terms of an overview of where we're going to go, we're going to talk a little bit about why advocacy is so important in the disability services, why you need to build relationships with legislators, how to structure a visit with a legislator, what to cover in your visit, how to follow up, and then some ongoing advocacy strategies. So I'm going to walk you through some practical examples of things that we need to do, and then Jan's going to supplement those with some of her personal experiences. I think as we go through, I think it's important to establish at the very outset why disability is different than other areas. And if we look back at the history of disability services here in the US and in most countries is defined almost entirely by law, state, federal, and in some cases county. The disability services prior to the 1600s were delivered by churches, but as government grew and as the organization of governments expanded, that role shifted to the government. So if we go back to the 1600s in Europe, we find that the British Crown ended up providing services, and it was the same in France, Germany, and here in the United States. We didn't have a central organization providing services. It was local towns and municipalities that provided services. But people with disabilities, more so than any other group, live lives that are defined by government programs and funding. This means that if we want to improve the disability services, we have to engage with the government and with political systems to make that change. And that is different than many other groups that currently exist within our society. The government really does play a central role, whether it's early intervention or whether it's aging services in nursing homes. All of those systems are funded through both state and federal sources. So that's a little bit about why this is so important. So the important thing, and I know this is probably obvious for many of you, but our political system is run by elected citizens, like Jennifer Daley Provost, who we heard from earlier. And like anyone else, they are people, and they like to feel connected and supported. So like any relationship, working with policymakers requires effort. It requires preparation, and it requires passion. So as you build a relationship with legislators, you will find that legislators learn to trust and value your input and perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, I think Jan is a great example of this. Many legislators call on Jan because of the relationships that she has built with them. Let's see, Jan, do you want to add anything before I move on?
In the early 80s, when we started doing this, legislators said, if you, the disability community, cannot work together and be unified, then you're not getting anything. And so that is one reason the Legislative Coalition for People with Disabilities was formed, to try to have a unified voice representing the same issues, and that we don't fight with each other. So I may have specialized in special education and mental health, but I also know a lot of the programs that are in the social services and health departments.
I think that's a very good point. And it's one way that Utah is different from other states when it comes to legislative advocacy. I've worked in several different states. I've worked in Washington State, Idaho, Alaska, and a bit in Oregon on policy issues. And I've worked at the federal level on policy issues. And in many other locations, we find that different disability organizations are competing against each other for limited resources. And one of the things that makes Utah different is that the disability community here in the state tends to work together and be more collaborative than it is in many other parts of the country. And I think that is it's one of the reasons why I wanted to come back and work in Utah, is because there is this cross disability coalition that really helps us get things done. It doesn't mean that there's not occasionally disagreements, and it doesn't mean that there's not occasionally competitions for funding between special education or adult services. But in general, I think this history that the LCPD has set up, where there's a broad coalition across age ranges, professional groups, and interests, has served the state well. So again, it's really something that makes Utah unique.
Comment?
Yes, absolutely.
The issue that Jen talked about, the provider rates. I have had the opportunity during the fall to talk about that. There was a press conference of community advocates at the Capitol, and I spoke about that. And then I also was able to be in a meeting with the president of the Senate speaking on the same issue. And so not only do we work with legislators, we work with other community advocates.
Yep. And that, again, that collaboration becomes really important. You can, when it comes to building relationships, it's often easy to tell which relationships aren't healthy, and maintaining those healthy relationships between advocacy groups is also an important aspect of being effective. So when we talk about building relationships with legislators, one of the best ways to do that is actually going to meet with them. This is the best way to have your voice heard. And so it used to be that we were doing this in person. More and more since COVID, you can schedule virtual meetings with your legislator. But what I want to do is walk you through kind of the process and what you do to set up these meetings, and then what you cover in these meetings. I think the first thing to recognize is you should determine who your legislator is. Although you can meet with legislators from across the state, it's important that you begin with the legislators who live in, who represent your district. You are their constituent, and they are more likely to listen to you than a legislator who comes from another part of the state. So the easiest way to do that is to go to this link here, and I'll actually stop sharing and pull up this screen and show you how you see this. So if you click on that link, and it's on the legislative website, it's your district map, and it pulls up this map here. And you can type in your street address, and I can type in my street address. I live up here in Logan. And then I can just put in my zip code and then click find, and it will zoom in. And it will show me that my legislator is Dan Johnson in the House and Chris Wilson in the Senate. I can then go into each of these profiles. We'll take Dan, for example, and I can get the information that I need to contact Dan. It has his mailing address, it has his phone number, and it has his email. In many cases, this phone number is the legislator's cell phone. Cell phones have become more and more ubiquitous, and this is often a number that you can call, but it's also often a number that you can text. So we'll come back to that, but I think it's important to note that this isn't an office phone in many cases. In many cases, this is their actual personal cell phone. So this is
just by the way.
Yep, go ahead.
At 8 o'clock this morning, I went to the Public Education Appropriations Committee, and Dan Johnson sits on that committee.
And that's an important committee.
Yeah. And he says very good things.
Yeah, Dan's a good guy. Dan is he does a great job representing us. I just switched over to Chris Wilson's. This is the Senate profile for Chris Wilson. You'll see that Chris has several numbers here, his mobile, his work and his home phone, in addition to his address and his email. So again, you need to do a little bit of background, a little bit of digging, but yeah, there's multiple ways to contact your legislator. So when you call your legislator's office, and again, you can do this via phone call or you can do it via email. What you want to do is briefly introduce yourself as a constituent and a voter. You want to explain to them why you want to visit and ask to set up a time to come in and speak with the legislator, either in their district. So many of these legislators have home offices in your community, or in their capital office, which is where they tend to be during the legislative session.
And Chris Wilson is new. Last winter, it was his first session. That's something people need to know too, is what is their experience?
Yeah, and seniority makes a big difference. The more senior a legislator is, the more influence they tend to have within the legislative session. So let me actually stop sharing the screen and go back to my slides so that I can. So that's how you find their contact information. So again, as I was saying, when you find that contact information, introduce yourself, explain why you want to visit, and then recognize that depending upon the time of year, you may not be able to visit with them. And this is especially true if we're talking about federal folks, if we're talking about Chris Stewart, or we're talking about Mike Lee, or some of the folks who work in Washington, D.C. Frequently, legislators are busy and unavailable, but they have staff. And just because you don't get to meet with the legislator doesn't mean that you shouldn't set up a meeting. In many cases, it's very important to build a relationship with your legislator staff member, because their staff are who they listen to. And frequently their staff do a better job of representing our interests than even we can do. So in some cases, and especially during the session, it's more likely you'll meet with a staff person who covers health and education issues than with the actual legislator. And some people say, oh no, I don't want to meet with the staff, I only want to meet with the legislator. Do not do that. If you are waiting to meet with the legislator one-on-one, you will have a very difficult time, especially on federal issues. And again, building a relationship with a staff member is just as good as building a relationship with the legislator themselves. So Jan, do you want to add anything to that about staff members?
Well, now you're talking federal.
Yeah.
I do have a story that when LDS President Thomas Monson died, we were invited to sit with the family. And I let my husband know that if Senator Hatch came in, there was an issue. I wanted to talk with him. And he did come in very close to me with Mitt Romney. And he had seen me many times, but I said, I'm on the Hatch committee and this is the issue. And so you take opportunities when they come.
You do. You do take opportunities when they come, even if you can't get a meeting with them. But you know, ideally, if you can get a meeting, and recognize that these meetings are not long. So when you schedule a meeting, they will frequently schedule it for 10, maybe 15 minutes. This is the case with state and federal legislators. This means that you need to be concise and know what your issue is when you go in, which kind of leads to, well, setting up a visit. Let's go through some of the rest of these details. Some other things that may come up when you're trying to set up a visit. You may be asked to send in a written request. And again, this is more with the federal than with the state. But in many cases, they'll ask you to submit a written request for a meeting. And again, don't feel like it's a way for them to keep records and to keep things organized. As you write your written request, always refer to people using the appropriate title. In federal, it can be the Honorable, or Dear Senator, Dear Congressman, Dear Congresswoman, Dear Representative. Please do that so that, again, you're email doesn't look like junk mail, using to whom it may concern, or other just kind of generic addresses at the beginning can make it look like junk mail and be very quickly screened out by staff. Your letter or your email, when you submit it, needs to include who will be participating in the visit, their names and their affiliations, if you're going with a group, and it needs to include a short description of why you want to meet with your legislator. And again, literally a one-sentence description. I want to talk about home and community-based services. I would like to talk about special education funding. It does not have to be extensive, but at least letting them know what the topic is so that if necessary, they can prepare, but also they can assign the correct staff member if they are unable to meet with you. Finally, it is incredibly important that you identify yourself as a voter, and if possible, personalize the issue. So if this is an issue that directly impacts you or your family, it's very important to say, this is something that I have experience with. This is what I am experiencing. This is how it impacts me. Those personal stories become very, very important to having influence over the way that a legislator perceives a particular issue. And actually, that's what two of the other sessions here. So after this session, if you want to learn about how to tell your story and how to tell a compelling story, there are the two other training sessions, the self-advocacy breakout or the family advocacy breakout. And both of those are dealing with how do you personalize an issue. So, okay. So that's setting up a visit. Go ahead, Jen.
I have an addition.
Yep.
Last week, I was in a Zoom meeting with my senator and my representative. And yeah, it was a group, but they have known me for years and they know I'm experienced. But when you're sending a text or an email in Utah, include your address and that you are a constituent and that you're a voting constituent. So you do that, and then the issue, because they respond to constituents first.
Yep. Absolutely do that. Noting your that you are a voter is incredibly important. It's hard to, we don't see this side of it, but many legislators receive hundreds and thousands of emails and snail mail every day. And they literally have staff who are sorting through who are just random people and who are constituents. And so one way to make that first cut and make sure that somebody pays attention to your issue is to identify yourself as a voter and a constituent. So, okay. Preparing for your meeting. So you've contacted them, you've set up your meeting. Now it's time to do some preparation. And again, going on the relationship thing, just like you would spend some time preparing to go on a date, you need to spend some time preparing to go visit with your legislator. So the most important thing to do is to prepare your message and to have your message rehearsed so that you can deliver it in the amount of time that you have. You need to make sure that that message is clear. This is the issue. This is how it impacts me. And this is what I would like. So this doesn't mean that every meeting has to have a clearly defined action item. In some cases, you can just go visit with a legislator to introduce yourself and say, I'm a constituent. I'm concerned about these issues, and I wanted you to know, this is where I stand. In many cases here at the Institute for Disability, we go to meet with legislators just to update them on our work. So when we go to Washington, D.C., we frequently go to legislative offices and we meet with them and share the latest research, the latest training, the latest work that we're doing, and let them know that we are here as a resource for them. So although we're not asking them for something particularly, we are letting them know that we are a resource and we are here to help them. You can do the same thing as a constituent. You can say, I have kids who are in special education, and I have a lot of experience with special education issues. When these issues come up, please see me as a resource. I want to help you understand how these issues impact people. So again, you don't have to necessarily have an action item with a piece of legislation when you go in, but you should have a message. And you should be wanting something out of that visit. So like I said, and like it says on the slide here, it doesn't have to necessarily be about lobbying and saying, please vote for HB 150. You can just go in and say, I would really appreciate your support when special education issues come up. I have kids who are in special education, and I've seen the impact of increased funding on their outcomes. Something as simple as that can make a big difference in the way that a policymaker perceives an issue. And again, policymakers are interested in understanding how programs are working. And so a good example would be like in the last legislative session, there was some special education legislation passed. If you were to go in now and say, this is how this legislation has been working over the last year, it really helps policymakers feel like, oh, I made a difference. Oh, this program's working. Or if it's not working, when they go back into session, they can address some of the issues that maybe weren't thought out in the initial legislation. So again, you don't have to be lobbying for a specific bill, but you should have a clear purpose when you go in to meet with them. So Jan, do you want to add anything to that on preparation?
I think you can move forward.
Okay, perfect. Another part of preparing for your legislative visit is knowing your legislator. Just like in another relationship, you want to know the person that you're building that relationship with. Go to the legislator's website, review his or her biography, which is typically up there. Learn their party affiliation, learn which committees and subcommittees they're on, learn their past record. You can actually look up legislators' voting record. Learn where they stand on the issues. You don't want to go in, let's take Jennifer Daly Provost, who we heard from this morning, as a good example. You don't want to go in and complain to Jennifer Daly Provost that nobody's supporting, or that she's not supporting disability issues, and that she needs to do more for people with disabilities, when you haven't looked at her record and seen that almost invariably she's always supportive of disability issues. And so really understanding the person that you're talking to, are they supportive generally? Are they not supportive? How it really helps you deliver and prepare your message. Are you trying to convince somebody who tends to not see disability as a concern? Or are you trying to strengthen somebody who has always been an advocate and a supporter and help them continue to do that? Either way, that research is really, really important. And these facts will help guide your discussion and make you appear to be more informed. So again, this is a really, really important aspect that people frequently overlook. So yeah, do more research. Go for it.
Another thing we look for is, do they have a family member with a disability?
Yep.
Because they will be better listeners.
This is very true. And that frequently is not noted.
It is not noted.
Yeah, so it's something that you may have to find out through secondhand sources. But yeah, if they have a family member with a disability, it does make a big difference in how you approach them.
So one of the legislators I communicate with frequently is Steve Elison from Sandy. I was texting him this morning because the sound wasn't coming through on public ed. He knows me, so he answers. He has a daughter who's 13 with a very rare disability, not just rare in Utah, rare in worldwide. So he understands us. And then another thing, he does marvelous mental health work. And he's known some people who have suicided. And so he listens.
He does. And those things are things that you learn over time, but that really
Yes.
do make a big difference in how you approach, in how you approach these people. Okay, so kind of moving on, materials. When you go in for a visit, please make sure that you have some materials. Legislators meet in many cases with 20, 30, hundreds of people a day, and it's very easy to forget who you are. It's important when you go in that you leave something so they have something to remember you and your issue by. So even if you're not from a professional organization, preparing a one-page fact sheet that tells your story or that talks about how an issue impacts you is going to be very important to reminding the legislator what you wanted. Please make sure that you give them a business card if you have one, or at the top of your one-page fact sheet, put your name and your address and your contact, your phone number and your email. Those sort of things allow them, when they come across that again, or if they have questions, to get back in touch with you. And they will frequently get in touch with you if they are familiar with you and with your issue. I know there's legislators who call Jan all the time because they know that she's familiar with these issues and want to know what her position is on it. So it's not always necessary, but it's also important to bring additional supporting information. So that if there is information from an organization that you work with or other stuff that supports the point of your visit, you can bring that as well, but it's less important than that one-page fact sheet and your contact information. So,
And I wear a name tag. I've got it on now, so they can see my name and my organization. And I think that helps them to remember me.
it does. I know in the disability field, we spend our entire life trying to get away from labels, but the most important thing sometimes you can do is to label yourself. So
Well, yeah.
Remember your name. So
Remember my name.
Yep, that is an important one. Okay. One other thing in terms of preparing, if you are going in with a group, make sure that you strategize cooperatively and that you go in with a single message. And this frequently takes the form of like a dress rehearsal. You want everyone to appear professional, coordinated, and on message. So you need to decide who will make what points. You need to have your facts lined up prior to the meeting, decide who's going to do the initial presentation, who's going to answer questions, who's going to follow up. These are important things so that you don't appear disorganized. Legislators, just like anybody else, can get confused when they're getting multiple messages. And so please, if you're going in with a group, make sure you take time to strategize cooperatively. Okay, so during your visit, so you've done all this work, you've set it up, you've done the preparation, you're at your visit. Number one, be punctual and friendly. Even if you know you don't agree with them, always be kind. It makes a difference. Be early. In many cases, when we're doing legislative visits, we try to be to their office 10 to 15 minutes early, because in some cases they are running ahead of schedule. In some cases they're running behind schedule. It's better to be early than to be late. When you are there, deliver your message, be concise, be sure, especially within the disability services, to explain all acronyms and programs and funding sources. Many times the programs that we work with in the disability field are very complex, and legislators don't always understand these systems. So you may need to be able to explain how some of these systems and funding work so they understand the impact. So again, that's part of your preparation, but make sure you're not just using acronyms. We use acronyms a lot. Say the entire word. If it's the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council, say that, not UDDC. If it's the Legislative Coalition for Persons with Disabilities, use that and not LCPD. Don't assume that they know what these are. Talk about the issue and how it impacts your family. Ask for a commitment. If that's appropriate, say, I would really appreciate your support on HB 150 if you're asking them to vote a particular way. Again, you may not be, you may be just wanting them to get to know who you are and what your concerns are. But it's always good to ask for a commitment. Even if there's not a particular piece of legislation, you can leave by saying, I'd appreciate your support for all special education issues. Something like that can be memorable and important. And then be prepared, but honest when you get questions. You will often get questions. Some of these questions you may not be prepared for. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know, but I will get back with you. Don't try to make something up. Legislators, like anybody else, can tell when you don't understand, and it's better to make sure that they have the correct facts than to try to make something up on the spot. So again, be prepared for questions, but if you don't know, be honest and say that you will follow up with them. Jan, what have been some of your experiences on visits?
Well, I was trying to remember how I first developed these relationships, and I can't. And it's better to be there in person. We're faced with a very difficult time, but I attend committee meetings. People come and ask me who I am. They're just curious about who is in the room. I agree with what you're saying, and yeah, don't make anything up. And I mostly don't work on issues that have affected my family. I am there for other people who have disabilities. But
okay, I think we're done at 10:20. Is that, I lost the timeline here. So
do people have questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple more things to wrap up. So let me just quickly cruise through these final items, and then we'll take a few questions here at the end. Yeah, Aubrey just said 5 more minutes. So let me cruise through these, and then we'll take any questions. So immediately after the visit, after you talk with your legislator, follow up with a thank you letter outlining the points you covered in the meeting. Okay, so everybody likes a thank you letter. People are not doing this anymore, but it is a way for people to remember you. And then send reports, newspaper articles, emails, follow up. Building a relationship, like I said at the beginning, takes effort. And if you don't invest effort in becoming a resource for your legislator, they are not going to remember you. So please make sure that after the visit and after you've introduced yourself in person, that you maintain that relationship and you put some effort towards cultivating it. So in terms of next steps, a legislative visit should not be a one-time event. Just like going on a date shouldn't be necessarily a one-time event if you want to develop a long-term meaningful relationship. It's the same with legislators. The more often you visit with them, the more comfortable you will get with the process, and the more they will see you as an important resource. The most important element in a visit is establishing a personal connection that will continue into the future. So again, the more personal you can make it, the more memorable the stories you tell, the more you are able to be helpful to that legislator, the more likely it is that they will remember you. It's also important that as you start doing this, that you make it part of a broader advocacy agenda. People know Jan because she advocates for disability issues. People don't know Jan because she's advocating for gun rights or something else. It's because she's developed an agenda and a focus on disability, whether it's mental health, special education, adult services, whatever the case may be. It's a broad disability agenda, and people know that's Jan's deal. And so people go to Jan when they have questions about disability issues. So make sure that even in your broader and over time, that you have a clear, consistent focus, because that's what people will come to know you by.
Yes.
So with that
And-
said, Jan, go ahead.
Well, I have relationships with the fiscal analysts, with secretaries, with spouses. And we had an experience on Friday. The wife of former Senator Lyle Hilliard was trying to find me. And she called this person and she called that person. And she finally found someone that said, call Matt. And Matt had my phone number. And so this woman was able to call me about her 13-year-old grandson who has autism. And I am talking to other people to find answers for her, and then I will call her back. So it gets to be a lot of people that you're connecting with, and you may not know that.
Yep, that is true. Okay, so yeah, that was funny. That was how Jan and I, that was how we started our weekend. Alice called me and then got Jan's number from me, and these relationships make a difference. And they are important. So we have 38 seconds. You'll probably see a screen that just popped up for you. It's going to take us all back to the main room, and then we're going to have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to go to the next breakout session. If you have questions or anything that we can help you with, please feel free to email, and I'm happy to help with that. I also posted the Legislative Advocacy Guide that I structured this session on in the chat, and you are welcome to download that and use that. And with that, I just want to say thank you all for your time and for participating in this session.